The forest was alive. But not in the way that Layla had imagined. The moonlight cast an almost ghostly glow over the canopy of gnarled trees that stretched above her like ancient hands reaching toward the heavens. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it an unsettling sense of tension. There was something strange in the air, a palpable feeling of dread, like the forest itself was watching her, waiting. Layla adjusted the straps of her backpack, feeling the weight of her equipment pull on her shoulders. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the humidity of the night pressing in on her chest. She had been walking for hours, her only company the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Yet, every so often, the forest fell into an eerie silence, the kind of silence that made your skin prickle and your heart skip a beat. It was as if everything around her was holding its breath. She had come out here to investigate the strange reports, disappearances, sightings of bizarre animals, and unexplainable phenomena. People who had ventured into these woods had never returned, and the few who had were never the same. But Layla wasn't one to be swayed by rumors. She was a scientist, an expert in cryptozoology, and she had studied the myths and legends surrounding the forest for years. This was her chance to prove that there was a logical explanation for everything. She had prepared for weeks, gathering every piece of equipment she could possibly need. Her cameras were ready, her recording devices were on standby, and she had made detailed plans to track and document whatever she might encounter. But as she ventured deeper into the woods, the feeling that something wasn't right only intensified. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, the gnawing sensation that this wasn't just a field study, it was something far more dangerous. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Layla froze. Her gaze snapped toward the shadows where she thought she had seen something move. The trees were thick, the underbrush dense, and there was little visibility in the low light. Her heart hammered in her chest as her hand instinctively reached for the flashlight hanging at her side. She clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing only the twisting trunks of ancient trees and the thick fog that clung to the ground like a veil. "Get a grip, Layla," she muttered to herself. "It's just the wind. Or an animal." But deep down, she knew it wasn't the wind. It felt wrong. The forest felt wrong. The whisper of leaves was no longer comforting. It sounded more like a warning. As though the very trees were trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. Her footsteps quickened as she moved forward, the crunch of twigs beneath her boots the only sound that accompanied her. She could feel the forest closing in on her, the trees pressing closer together with every step. The path that had been wide enough earlier was now barely a single person's width. The further she went, the more isolated she felt, like she had stepped into another world entirely. A world that didn't belong to her. She pulled out her camera and snapped a few pictures, hoping that the noise of the shutter would calm her nerves. But when she checked the photos later, she would see something she couldn't explain. In the edges of the frame, a dark shape, human-shaped, but impossibly large, moved with uncanny speed, barely visible in the shadows. Layla didn't see it at the time. But she would see it later, and she would wonder if it had always been there, lurking just out of sight, watching her every move. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to leave this place behind and never return. But something, a sense of curiosity, perhaps, or the thrill of the unknown, kept her pushing forward. There was a part of her that knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when the stories would no longer just be stories. The moment when everything she had believed about this forest would either be proven true or utterly shattered. She had heard the legends, whispers of creatures that moved like shadows, of beings that were neither animal nor human. There had been rumors of disappearances, scientists, explorers, hikers, who had gone missing in these woods. The locals spoke in hushed tones, warning anyone who dared venture too deep into the forest. Layla had scoffed at the warnings. After all, she was a scientist. She didn't believe in superstitions. But now, as she walked deeper into the heart of the forest, she began to wonder if the stories were more than just fiction. A sudden rustle behind her snapped her out of her thoughts. Layla spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. She raised her flashlight, sweeping the beam across the dense underbrush, but saw nothing. Nothing but trees and shadows. Her breath came quicker now, her pulse racing. She had never been this scared in her life. She was alone in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town. The idea of being lost in a place like this, no cell service, no way of contacting anyone, suddenly seemed like the worst possible scenario. A deep, guttural growl came from somewhere in the distance. It was low and menacing, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet. Layla's blood ran cold. She had heard animals growl before, but this was different. This wasn't a typical sound. There was an unnatural quality to it, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot, unwilling to obey her brain's command. Layla's eyes darted around the darkened forest, but she couldn't see anything through the dense trees and the creeping fog. The growl sounded again, closer this time. The ground beneath her feet trembled, just slightly, as if something massive was moving through the forest, something not entirely of this world. Without warning, the bushes to her left exploded in a flurry of motion. Layla's heart skipped a beat as a massive shape charged toward her, its glowing eyes locked onto hers. The creature's form was dark, indistinct, like a shadow with tendrils of smoke swirling around it. It was impossibly large, larger than any animal she had ever seen. Its claws scraped the earth as it moved, and Layla could hear its labored breathing, heavy and deep. Fear surged through her, freezing her to the spot. The creature was upon her in an instant. She couldn't react. She couldn't even scream. It was too late. Then, a blinding light flashed across her vision. The creature recoiled, hissing in pain, as though it had been struck by something powerful. Layla stumbled backward, heart pounding. She looked up and saw a figure, a person, standing at the edge of the clearing, holding some kind of glowing device in their hand. The creature snarled, eyes narrowing as it took a step back, as though unsure of the stranger. Without thinking, Layla turned and ran, her legs finally obeying her frantic thoughts. She didn't know who the person was or what had just happened, but she didn't care. The forest was alive, and it was hunting her. She dashed through the trees, her mind racing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature's growls echoed behind her, but she couldn't look back. She couldn't stop. She had to escape. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, the trees closing in around her, narrowing her path. The forest wasn't just alive. It was changing. And then, just as she thought she couldn't run any further, the world around her went black. The first thing Layla felt as she regained consciousness was the cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the wind or the chill of night, it was a deeper, more insidious cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. She shivered uncontrollably, her body weak and heavy, as if it had been drained of all energy. Her eyelids fluttered, her mind clouded with confusion as she tried to gather her senses. The forest was silent. No growls. No rustling leaves. No heavy breathing. Just the stillness that seemed to stretch endlessly around her. Layla's eyes opened slowly, and she squinted against the dim light of the early morning. She was lying on the ground, her back against a thick tree trunk. Her hands instinctively reached for her flashlight and equipment, but she found nothing. Her fingers scraped against the rough bark, and she froze, her heart pounding once more. Her flashlight was gone. Her gear, everything, was gone. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, her voice sounding foreign in the eerie quiet. It took her several moments to remember what had happened, the creature, the growl, the figure with the glowing device. The memory hit her like a sudden wave of realization, and her pulse quickened. Had she been rescued? By whom? And where was the creature? As her eyes adjusted to the light, Layla saw that she was no longer in the same part of the forest where she had been moments before. The trees around her were different, more ancient-looking, with twisted, gnarled roots that seemed to stretch down into the earth like fingers clawing their way out of the ground. The air was thick with mist, and the faint scent of damp earth filled her nostrils. Her heart skipped a beat when she noticed a figure standing not far from her. It was a person, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in rugged, utilitarian clothing, with a cloak that billowed slightly in the wind. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but his posture was unmistakably confident, calm, as if he belonged here. His presence was both reassuring and unnerving at the same time. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice deep, rough, but oddly comforting. Layla's throat tightened. She hadn't been expecting to speak to anyone, not out here, in the middle of nowhere. The words she had prepared seemed to escape her, replaced by the raw fear and uncertainty that flooded her mind. She forced herself to sit up, her muscles sore, her limbs stiff. The cold had left a numbness in her fingers, and it took effort to move. I think so," Layla managed to say, though her voice trembled. "Where am I?" The man glanced at the dense woods around them, his eyes scanning the trees before he answered. "You're safe. For now. But you're far from where you started." The reassurance in his tone did little to ease her anxiety. How could she be safe in a forest she didn't recognize, surrounded by a person she didn't know? And how had she gotten here? Her mind raced with questions, but she had to focus on the basics first, get her bearings, understand what was going on. "You're not from around here, are you?" the man asked, his gaze piercing through her uncertainty. Layla nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. "No. I was studying the forest. I don't even know what happened." The man's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. "I figured as much. This place isn't for the faint of heart. And it's not easy to get lost here, not unless you're meant to." Layla frowned, confused by his cryptic words. "Meant to?" she echoed. He didn't elaborate further, but instead gestured for her to follow. "You've seen things, haven't you? Things that can't be explained." She nodded hesitantly, the memory of the creature coming back in flashes, the glowing eyes, the growls, the way it had appeared out of nowhere. The fear had been so raw, so real, that it felt like she could still feel it gripping her chest. "Not everything in this forest is what it seems," the man continued, as if he had read her mind. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Layla didn't know how to answer. She wasn't sure if she was even prepared to accept what she had seen. But the man seemed to understand. "Come," he said. "I'll take you to my camp. We can talk there." She hesitated for a moment, torn between the fear of the unknown and the trust she felt, oddly, in this stranger. Her mind was still reeling, but she realized she had little choice. She didn't know where she was or how she had gotten here. She didn't know if she could find her way back to safety on her own. With a final glance at the forest around her, Layla nodded and stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she forced herself to keep moving. The man led her through the forest with an ease that suggested he had walked these paths 1,000 times before. He moved through the trees with a fluidity that was almost unnatural. There were no signs of struggle, no noise, nothing to indicate that they were being followed. But Layla couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was still watching them, its silent gaze lingering on every step they took. As they walked, Layla's curiosity grew. She had so many questions, about the forest, about the creature, about the man who had saved her, but she held them back. She needed to know more about where she was and what was really going on. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to get them by being cautious. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. The man didn't answer right away. He seemed to consider her question for a long moment before speaking. "Names aren't important here," he said finally, his tone flat. "Not in a place like this. That was odd. Layla had expected an answer, at least a name to grasp onto, but instead, his words left her feeling even more unsettled. Why wouldn't he tell her his name? Was it that dangerous to reveal who he was? They arrived at a small clearing, and in the center of it stood a fire, crackling with warmth. A tent sat nearby, and several makeshift structures were scattered around, covered with tarps. It wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest that the man had been living here for a while, far away from the civilization Layla had known. "Sit," the man said, pointing to a stone bench beside the fire. "You need warmth. We'll talk once you've rested." Layla didn't argue. Her body ached, her mind still racing, but she sat down gratefully beside the fire. The warmth felt good against her cold skin, and she let herself close her eyes for a moment, trying to shake the disorientation. As the fire crackled in front of her, she could feel the weight of the man's gaze upon her. It was as if he was studying her every move. She wanted to speak, to ask him about everything, but she held herself back. There was a presence about him that made her think twice about rushing into questions. But she couldn't hold it in forever. "Why did you help me?" Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he added more wood to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. After a long pause, he finally turned to face her. "I didn't help you. Not in the way you think," he said slowly. "I saved you from something much worse. You're not the first to venture into this forest. But you're the first to survive what's out there. And that's not by accident." Layla's stomach twisted at his words. What was he implying? What had happened out there in the forest that she hadn't seen? His next words were like a punch to her chest. "Layla, you've stumbled upon the most dangerous species in the galaxy. And if you don't understand that soon, it will be the last thing you ever learn." The fire crackled in the quiet clearing, its light dancing over the figures of Layla and the stranger. She couldn't tear her gaze from him, her mind still reeling from his last words. The most dangerous species in the galaxy. His voice echoed in her mind as she stared into the flames, trying to make sense of what he had said. The words didn't seem to fit together, didn't seem possible. Yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that he wasn't lying. She had stumbled into something far beyond the world she knew. Something ancient. Something far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. And she had no idea how she had gotten involved in it. She had been studying the forest as a cryptozoologist, investigating strange reports of unusual creatures and sightings. But now, she was trapped in the heart of a mystery that reached far beyond her understanding. The man's eyes were fixed on her, as if waiting for her to speak. He had said her name, which unsettled her further. She hadn't told him who she was, so how did he know? "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice breaking the silence. She sat up straighter, her legs still feeling stiff and weak from the ordeal. "What do you mean, the most dangerous species? What is this forest?" The man exhaled deeply, as though he had been waiting for her to ask this question. He didn't immediately answer, instead gazing out into the trees as if considering how much to reveal. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low. "The creature in the shadows, the one that moved with unnatural speed. The one that felt like it was more than just an animal." Layla nodded, her mind flashing back to the encounter. The creature's eyes, glowing like molten lava. The way it had moved, almost effortlessly, through the trees, its growl reverberating through the earth. The sheer sense of power it had exuded was something she could never forget. "Yes," she whispered. "It was unlike anything I've ever seen. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else." The man's gaze hardened. "That creature, whatever you think it is, isn't from this world. And it isn't alone." Layla's blood ran cold. Her stomach twisted with unease. "What are you talking about? What are these things?" The man stood up abruptly, pacing in the small space around the fire. They are known as the Alcarians. A race of beings far older than humanity, far more dangerous. They have been traveling through the galaxies for centuries, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. They're not just predators, they're hunters, killers. Their whole existence is centered around survival, and they'll do whatever it takes to remain at the top of the food chain. And the forest? It's their hunting ground. Layla's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't make sense of it. You're telling me that the creature I saw is one of these Alcarians? But, why didn't anyone warn me? How did I even end up here? The man paused, his gaze flicking over to her with an unreadable expression. You weren't supposed to be here. This place was kept hidden, for a reason. But somehow, you found it. You've walked into something bigger than yourself, Layla. She felt a pang of fear, and a sinking feeling in her stomach. What do you mean, I wasn't supposed to be here? The stranger's lips twitched, but he didn't smile. The Alcarians are selective about who they allow to wander in their territories. They allow certain people to enter, knowing they will either kill or become part of the hunt. Most of the time, they let the forest do their dirty work. But sometimes, like you, certain individuals attract their attention. And you've attracted theirs. Now, you're part of the game. Layla shook her head, trying to process the information. So, I'm a target? The man's eyes softened, a flicker of regret crossing his face. Not just a target. You're a participant now. You're in the hunt, whether you want to be or not. Layla's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea what kind of nightmare she had stumbled into, but every instinct in her body screamed for her to run, to leave this place behind. But how could she? The man seemed to know more about the forest than she could ever hope to. He had rescued her from the creature. She had no choice but to trust him, for now. I can't just leave, she said quietly. I need to know more about these Alcarians. What do they want with me? Why are they hunting me? The man sighed and sat down beside her, his face heavy with thought. The Alcarians don't just hunt for food, or sport. They hunt to prove their superiority, to maintain their place as the apex predators of the galaxy. They've seen humanity before, often in passing, as insignificant as ants scurrying across the ground. But you've shown them something new. You've shown them that humans can survive. And that makes you dangerous to them. Layla frowned. But I haven't done anything. I'm just studying the forest. You're studying the wrong forest, the man said, his voice sharp. You're studying a place that's far older than any of us. These woods have been here for centuries, far before humanity even existed. But it's not just the Alcarians who are drawn to this place. The forest itself is unique. It calls to certain people. People like you. Layla's confusion deepened. Calls to certain people? What do you mean by that? The man's eyes darkened. As he looked at the trees surrounding them. This forest isn't just a natural ecosystem. It's a convergence point. A place where multiple dimensions and realities meet. It's a doorway. And the Alcarians, well, they've learned how to use it. They use this place as a breeding ground for their species, as a training ground for their young. They use it to sharpen their hunting skills. Layla shook her head, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what he was saying. So, this place is some kind of portal? A place between worlds? Yes, the man replied, his voice almost a whisper. But not just any portal. It's a portal that attracts beings from all over the universe. The Alcarians are only one species that come through here. There are others. But they are the most dangerous. They have an agenda. And that agenda is to conquer everything in their path. A chill ran down Layla's spine. She had no idea what kind of world she had walked into. Her mind was racing with questions, but the one question that kept resurfacing was the most important. "Why are you helping me?" Layla finally asked, her voice small but insistent. "You said you saved me. But why? What's your role in all this?" The man's face darkened, and he stood up, looking away from her. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a wall. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and bitter. "I was once like you," he said. "A researcher, someone looking for answers. I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know that I was signing my own death sentence when I came here. But I did. And now, I'm trapped. I've spent years here, learning everything I could about the Alcarians and the forest. I've learned how to survive. And I want to help you survive, too." Layla stared at him, struggling to understand. "Trapped? You mean you can't leave?" The man shook his head. "I tried. Many times. But this place doesn't let people leave. Not unless you know the way. The forest keeps you here. It traps you, binds you. And the Alcarians? They feed on those who try to escape. They feed on your fear, your desperation." Layla stood up, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. "So, what do we do now? How do we escape this place? How do we survive?" The man turned back to her, his eyes steely with determination. "We don't just escape. We fight. And we do it together." He took a deep breath, his gaze intense. "The Alcarians won't stop hunting us. But we can fight back. We can survive. And we can beat them." Layla looked at him, the fear still gnawing at her but replaced by something else, something like hope. The idea of survival, of fighting back, was a distant dream. But maybe, just maybe, with the man's knowledge and experience, they had a chance. They had to. The forest was waiting. The hunt was about to begin. This part delves deeper into the mystery of the Alcarians and the forest, revealing more the days blurred together. As Layla and the stranger moved through the thick, suffocating forest. They no longer spoke much, only when necessary, an exchange of tactics, survival methods, or updates on the situation. The mystery of the Alcarians loomed heavy over them both, and Layla's mind spun with questions. They had barely begun to scratch the surface of the forest's secrets, and yet the deeper they went, the more she felt the weight of an invisible presence pressing in on her. The forest had become more than just an eerie wilderness, it was alive, pulsating with some unfathomable energy. The trees stretched impossibly high, and their twisted roots seemed to shift and change beneath the surface, almost as if the forest itself was conscious. Every step felt like a test, and the further they went, the more Layla felt like they were being drawn toward something. Something dark, something ancient. Layla had been walking for what felt like hours, her mind still struggling to process everything the man had told her. The Alcarians. The forest as a portal. Their hunt. She had tried to push it all to the back of her mind, but it was impossible. Fear seeped into her thoughts, and the closer they got to their unknown destination, the more real and terrifying it all became. "Do you know where we're going?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the dry air that seemed to have settled in the woods. She glanced at the stranger beside her, but his expression remained unreadable as always. He nodded, his eyes scanning the trees around them with a calm that unsettled her. "Yes. We're heading toward the center of the forest. The heart. That's where they breed." "Breed?" Layla echoed, her stomach flipping uneasily. "What do you mean? I thought you said they were hunters." "They are," the man said, his voice low, filled with the weight of years of experience. "But they breed in this forest. The Alcarians use it as a sanctuary, a breeding ground for their young. This forest is a place where they prepare. They teach their offspring how to hunt. How to kill." A deep sense of dread coiled in Layla's stomach. "And you think we're going to the center of it? Why?" The man stopped walking and turned to face her. His eyes held an intensity that made her uneasy. "We don't have a choice, Layla. The Alcarians are hunting us, and they'll stop at nothing to find us. The only way to fight them is to understand them. We need to reach the heart of the forest. That's where the key is." "The key?" Layla repeated, her voice cracking slightly. She was losing track of the conversation, but she couldn't stop herself from asking more questions. There were too many pieces of the puzzle still missing. He nodded. "Yes. There's something at the center of the forest, something powerful. It's the only way we stand a chance. But getting there won't be easy. The Alcarians won't let us just waltz in." Layla swallowed hard. She had no idea what to expect. She had thought she was prepared to study the forest, to document the creatures and anomalies. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp rustling in the underbrush. Layla froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her pocketknife. The man, however, didn't move. He just stood there, watching, his gaze fixed on the dense foliage ahead. "Stay calm," he whispered, almost too quietly for her to hear. Layla's heart hammered in her chest. The forest was alive, that much was clear, but what was watching them now? She could feel it, a presence, something that wasn't the wind or the trees. It was something more. Something far more dangerous. The rustling stopped. The air was thick with tension. And then, there was a sound. A low, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the knife's handle, but she made no move. The stranger stood motionless, as if he had expected this. "Is it them?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly drew a long, curved knife from his side, a weapon unlike anything Layla had ever seen. It glinted in the dim light as he held it at the ready, his stance calm but alert. "They found us," he said quietly. Before Layla could react, the bushes exploded with movement. Something large, massive, lunged from the shadows. A creature, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow, its body sleek and powerful, its jaws snapping open. The Alcarian. It was even more terrifying up close. Its body was a monstrous blend of sleek muscle and alien anatomy, with long, spindly limbs that seemed too long for its torso. Its eyes locked onto Layla with a hunger she couldn't even begin to describe. And then it moved. Faster than Layla could register, the creature was upon them. It charged with a terrifying shriek, its claws raking through the air, aiming for her throat. The man acted in an instant. His knife flashed in the dim light, cutting through the air with deadly precision. He slashed across the creature's face, leaving a trail of dark, glistening blood. The Alcarian howled in pain, stumbling back with an enraged snarl. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature was relentless. It recovered quickly and lunged again, its claws swiping dangerously close to Layla. The man stepped in front of her, blocking the attack with his own body. He took the blow, his muscles tensing as the Alcarian's claws scraped across his side. Layla screamed in panic, but the man pushed her behind him, his face set with grim determination. "Run, now," he ordered. She hesitated, frozen in terror, but the look in his eyes was enough to snap her out of her paralysis. Without thinking, she turned and ran. Her feet moved automatically, her body propelled by pure survival instinct. She didn't know how long she ran, but it felt like hours. The thick trees blurred by, the underbrush grabbing at her legs, trying to slow her down. She heard nothing but the pounding of her own heart and the sound of her breath ragged in her throat. She dared not look behind her. When she finally came to a stop, her legs trembling beneath her, she realized she was no longer alone. The man had caught up to her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood stained his clothes, and his expression was set in a grim mask of determination. He looked like he had been through hell, but he was still standing. "Are you hurt?" Layla asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "I'll survive. But we can't stay here." Layla wanted to argue, to ask him if he was sure, but something in his eyes stopped her. He was a man who had lived through far worse, and yet the urgency in his voice made it clear that they were not safe yet. Without another word, the two of them began to move again, deeper into the forest. They could still hear the creature somewhere in the distance, its growls echoing through the trees. But it was no longer their immediate concern. The stranger led them toward what Layla could only describe as a maze of shifting trees and paths, twisting and turning in a way that didn't make sense. Every step seemed to bring them deeper into the heart of the forest, but the way the trees moved and shifted beneath their feet made her question if they were even on a real path at all. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally reached a small, open clearing. In the center stood a massive, ancient tree, its trunk wider than any tree Layla had ever seen. The branches stretched high above, twisting into the sky like a great network of veins. The air around it hummed with an energy she couldn't explain. "This is it," the man said, his voice low but filled with a quiet awe. Layla stared at the tree, her heart racing. It was beautiful, and terrifying. There was something about it, something in the air, that told her this was the key to everything. The forest had led them here. And now, they would have to face whatever was waiting inside. The air was thick with an unnatural hum, like the heartbeat of something ancient and alive. Layla stood at the edge of the clearing, staring up at the massive tree. Its twisted roots coiled deep into the earth, and its branches reached upward like skeletal arms, blocking out the sky. There was a sense of power that radiated from it, an energy that made her skin crawl and her heart race. It felt like the forest itself was breathing, its pulse synchronizing with her own. The stranger, whose name Layla still didn't know, stepped forward, his face set in a grim expression. "This is the heart of the forest," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it all begins. Where it all ends." Layla swallowed hard, her throat dry from the tension that had been building up in her chest. Her mind raced with questions. What is this place? What is this tree? The man's eyes locked with hers. His expression one of resigned determination. "This tree is the center of the Alcarian hunt. It's more than just a tree, it's a conduit. A source of power. The Alcarians have been coming here for centuries, using the energy from this place to breed and to train their young. They use it to sustain themselves, to remain at the top of the food chain. And if we don't stop them here, they'll continue to spread their terror across the universe." Layla's heart pounded in her chest. "But how? How do we stop them? What do we need to do?" The man took a step closer to the tree, his gaze never leaving the dark, gnarled trunk. "We need to sever the connection between the Alcarians and this place. This tree is their lifeline. It's what keeps them powerful. If we destroy it, we destroy their ability to control the forest. But getting to it won't be easy. The Alcarians have placed guardians here, creatures bound to protect this tree. We'll have to fight our way through them." Layla's stomach churned. She had thought she had seen terror before, but now, with the stakes laid out before her, she understood how deep this went. The forest was not just a place of mystery, it was the key to an ongoing, cosmic battle, one that was far beyond anything she could have imagined. The Alcarians were not just hunters. They were invaders, parasites, and the forest was their weapon. She glanced at the man, uncertainty flooding her. "You're saying we need to destroy the tree? How do we even do that? It's enormous." He nodded grimly. "I don't know how, but I've seen what happens when this place is disturbed. The energy here is like nothing else I've ever felt. If we can disrupt it, we'll disrupt their control. But we'll have to be quick. The Alcarians will be onto us soon." Before Layla could respond, a loud, low growl echoed through the trees, reverberating through the clearing. Her blood ran cold. The sound was unmistakable. "They've found us," the man muttered, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Get ready." Layla's heart skipped a beat as shadows moved between the trees, creatures emerging from the darkness. They were the Alcarian guardians, large, hulking beasts, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, their bodies covered in armor-like scales. They were fast, terrifyingly fast, and their claws were sharp enough to rip through metal. Layla's breath caught in her throat as the first of the guardians stepped forward, its massive form blocking the way to the tree. The man raised his weapon, a curved blade that gleamed in the dim light. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. But Layla didn't have time to think. The guardians were closing in fast. She could see the savage hunger in their eyes, the primal rage that drove them. The stranger didn't hesitate. He rushed forward with terrifying speed, his blade flashing in the air as he struck the first guardian. The creature howled in pain, stumbling backward, but it quickly regained its footing, lashing out with its claws. Layla's instincts kicked in. She knew she had no choice but to fight. She had seen enough in the past few days to understand that running wouldn't get her anywhere. She drew the pocketknife from her side, the cold steel of the blade feeling alien in her hand. She rushed forward, slashing at the second guardian that had appeared, her heart racing with terror and adrenaline. The creature dodged her strike, its massive claws swiping just inches from her face. She barely managed to duck, the sound of its claws scraping across the earth deafening in her ears. She backed away quickly, her body moving on pure instinct as she searched for an opening. The man was a whirlwind of motion beside her, his blade flashing with deadly accuracy. He was fast, too fast, and each strike he made seemed to land with devastating effect. The first guardian fell to the ground with a heavy thud, its blood staining the earth black. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining guardians closed in, circling the two of them with predatory intent. Layla's heart hammered in her chest as the creatures stalked forward, their eyes glowing, their claws clicking against the ground. They were relentless. Their hunger for blood was palpable. The man swung his blade again, this time striking another guardian's leg, causing it to stumble. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice strained with the effort of the battle. "We need to get to the tree." Layla nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She ran, dodging the claws of the guardians as she sprinted toward the massive tree in the center of the clearing. The man was close behind her, still fending off the creatures with his swift strikes, but she could see the toll the battle was taking on him. He was bleeding, his movements slower, more labored. Just as Layla reached the base of the tree, she felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. The guardians were closing in. The air felt charged with energy, and the trees around them seemed to bend and shift, as though reacting to the battle. Layla turned to look at the man, who was now backed against one of the tree's enormous roots, struggling to hold off the remaining creatures. "Do it," he shouted at her, his face grim. "Destroy the tree. This is the only chance we have." Layla didn't hesitate. She gripped the nearest branch, her hands shaking, and pulled with all her strength. The branch snapped with a loud crack, sending a shower of leaves falling around her. She tossed it aside and looked up at the massive trunk. There had to be a way. There had to be a weak spot. The energy emanating from the tree was almost suffocating, and Layla could feel it pulsing beneath her skin. She thought of the stories she had read about the ancient trees in mythology, how they were often the source of great power. The tree wasn't just alive, it was connected to the very fabric of the forest. Its roots were intertwined with everything in this place. If she could disrupt that connection, if she could sever its hold. Without thinking, Layla reached into her backpack and grabbed the small, experimental device she had been using for research. It was a high-frequency emitter designed to disrupt biological and electromagnetic signals. She had never intended for it to be used in a situation like this, but there was no time to second-guess herself. She activated the device, feeling the pulse of energy surge through her hand. The ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate as the device hummed with power. The tree trembled. The guardians howled in anger, but the pulse of energy grew louder. The tree's branches shuddered, and the glow in the guardians' eyes began to fade. The creatures faltered, their movements slowing as the very energy of the tree began to unravel. The man was still fighting, but now he could see the change. "It's working," he shouted. "Keep it up." Layla's heart pounded in her chest as the energy surged from the device. The tree seemed to convulse, its trunk cracking with an ear-splitting sound. The guardians staggered, their bodies shaking, their connection to the tree severed. And then, with a deafening roar, the tree's massive trunk split in half, the energy that had sustained it for centuries finally breaking apart. The forest went silent. For a moment, Layla stood there, breathless, as the world around her seemed to shift. The guardians collapsed to the ground, their forms turning to dust as the power of the tree faded. The forest trembled once more, but it was no longer the same. The grip of the Alcarians was gone. The battle was over. The silence in the aftermath of the battle was almost as deafening as the chaos that had preceded it. Layla stood at the base of the shattered tree, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the fight. The guardians were gone. The forest, once alive with the hum of alien energy, had fallen silent, as if it, too, was processing what had just transpired. The massive, ancient tree now lay in ruins, its twisted trunk split down the middle, its roots recoiling in on themselves, as if trying to withdraw from the world. Layla took a slow, shuddering breath, her hands trembling as she lowered the device she had used to sever the tree's connection to the Alcarians. The energy she had felt from the tree had been overwhelming, a kind of raw power that had made her feel small and insignificant in comparison. But now, it was gone. The forest felt different, less oppressive, less alive in the way it had been. But there was still a sense of something dark lingering, just beyond the edge of her awareness. She turned to the man, who had fought beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion but also with a look of grim satisfaction. Blood covered his clothes, his breathing shallow and labored from the battle. Despite the wounds he had sustained, there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. He had known that this would be the final stand. And they had won. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, taking in the enormity of what they had just accomplished. The tree had been the heart of the forest, the source of the Alcarians' power. And now it was gone. The balance of the forest had shifted, and with it, the Alcarians' hold on the universe. "We did it," Layla said finally, her voice hoarse from the dust and smoke that still clung to the air. "We stopped them." The man nodded, his gaze distant as he surveyed the ruined remains of the tree. "Yes, but at what cost?" Layla frowned, her thoughts racing. "What do you mean?" "We stopped the Alcarians. The guardians are gone. The forest is." "The forest isn't just a tree," he interrupted, his voice heavy with a kind of sadness that Layla hadn't expected. "It's a living organism. The tree may have been the center of their power, but it was also the center of the balance that kept the Alcarians in check. Without it, the forest is vulnerable. It won't hold itself together for long. And the Alcarians, they're not just going to give up." Layla's stomach twisted at the implication. "You mean, they're going to come back? To rebuild?" "They'll try," the man said, his tone grim. "The Alcarians are relentless. They'll find another way to reconnect with the forest. They'll adapt. But we've bought the universe some time. Time enough to prepare." "Prepare?" Layla repeated, her brow furrowing. "For what?" The man's eyes darkened. "For the inevitable. The Alcarians don't just hunt. They conquer. And when they come again, it won't just be to take back what they lost. They'll be here to finish what they started." Layla's breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words sank in. The Alcarians were relentless, and the forest had been their weapon. But without the heart of the tree, without the energy it had provided, how could they ever hope to fight back against such an unstoppable force? She glanced at the man, who seemed to read her thoughts. "You don't think we've won yet, do you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Layla shook her head, her mind spinning. "No. I don't. But we don't even know where they are. Or how to stop them." "We don't need to know where they are," he said, his voice steady now. "We need to make sure they never come back. And for that, we need to strike at the heart of their empire." Layla stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up with the sudden shift in direction. "Their empire? What are you talking about? You said they were from another galaxy. How do we even? We find them. We go to their world," the man said, his gaze intense. "We destroy their home base. We do to them what they've done to so many others." Layla's heart skipped a beat. "You're saying we go to their home? To where they came from?" "Yes," he said, his voice resolute. "We go to their galaxy. We find the source of their power and we destroy it before they can rebuild. It's the only way to ensure they never get the chance to come back." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of what they meant. Layla could hardly believe what he was suggesting. The idea of traveling to another galaxy, of confronting the Alcarians on their own turf, seemed almost impossible. But then again, everything about this situation had seemed impossible from the beginning. "Is that even possible?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. "How do we even get to their galaxy?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, sleek device, nothing like the one they had used to disrupt the tree. This one looked far more advanced, its surface gleaming with an iridescent glow. It was a device that radiated power, the kind of power that made Layla's breath catch in her throat. "This," the man said, holding it up, "is the key." Layla stared at the device, her mind racing. "What is it?" "A portal generator," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "I've had it for years, studying it, trying to figure out how it works. It's designed to create a temporary bridge between dimensions, between galaxies. It's the only way we can reach their world." Layla's heart thudded in her chest. "You've had this all along? And you never told me?" The man's expression softened slightly. "I didn't know if we would make it this far. But now it's our only chance." For a long moment, Layla simply stared at the device, her mind whirling with the enormity of what he was suggesting. Going to another galaxy? Facing the Alcarians on their home turf? It sounded like madness. But then she thought back to everything they had already been through, the strange forest, the guardians, the creature that had nearly killed them. She thought about the lives lost, the terror that the Alcarians had spread across the universe. She thought about the people who had disappeared, the civilizations that had been destroyed. The stakes had never been higher. If they didn't stop the Alcarians now, they would come again, stronger than ever. "Let's do it," Layla said, her voice steady now, filled with a new sense of resolve. "Let's end this." The man nodded, a small but approving smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Good. Because it's time we finished what we started." He activated the portal generator, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air around them began to ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. The trees, the forest, the very ground beneath their feet began to distort, the lines between reality and something else blurring. Layla felt a strange tugging sensation, as though the fabric of space and time itself was being stretched. And then, with a final, resounding hum, the portal opened before them, a shimmering, swirling vortex of light. "We need to go now," the man said, his voice urgent. Layla took one last look at the ruined remains of the forest that had been the battleground for their survival, the forest that had been both a prison and a sanctuary. It was over. The Alcarians had been defeated, their power broken. But Layla knew that this was only the beginning. They stepped into the portal together, and as the world around them dissolved into light, Layla couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. They were about to confront the Alcarians on their home turf. And they would stop them, no matter the cost.